Welcome to the Art of Living Free series with Anthony Silard, brought to you by theartoflivingfree.org. Today, Dr. Silard explores how to be lonely without becoming depressed, Part 1.
Hi. As you may be aware, loneliness has skyrocketed over the last few years. So just in January of 2020, before the pandemic, at least before we knew about the pandemic in the United States, in January, Cigna released a study that found that over 3 in 5 Americans today are lonely. Yet loneliness is not the same as depression. We're going to look at the differences between the two. By understanding these differences, it can help us to understand how we can be lonely without having that loneliness devolve into depression. Spinoza, the philosopher, once said that emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering when we form a clear and precise picture of it. So let's form a clear and precise picture of loneliness and of depression. To start, we're going to use the emotion prototype approach, which was developed by Philip Shaver at the University of Denver. And the basic idea here is that there are primary and secondary emotions. So primary emotions are, for example, if you saw the movie Inside Out, there's joy, anger, fear, and sadness. Well, Sigal Barsade at Wharton Business School, she often speaks about why wasn't love included? That love is also one of the 5 primary or basic emotions. Okay, why wasn't that included in the movie? But who knows? Now, each of those primary emotions has a number of secondary emotions. So let's look at the primary emotion of sadness. So sadness has a number of secondary emotions, including loneliness and depression. So how do we go from sadness to loneliness? So there are thoughts that go through our mind, which are called psychological scripts. Those thoughts then take us from the primary emotion of sadness to the secondary emotion of loneliness. So those thoughts center around a certain theme. Here's the theme. Why aren't my relationships more meaningful than they are? Okay, so that takes us from sadness to loneliness. Well, depression is different. With depression, the thoughts are, or the psychological scripts, they are, why isn't my life more meaningful than it is? Okay, that's very different. Loneliness is focused on just one context of life, which are social relationships, a very important context, maybe the most important. But depression is more all-encompassing. For example, maybe you could hate your job and start to feel depressed because you just don't feel like you're achieving your life's purpose. But be quite happy with your social relationships at home and not feel lonely. All right, so the two are very different. So to understand how we can go from the primary emotion of sadness to the secondary emotion of either loneliness or depression, we need to understand what are called cognitive appraisals of emotions, which is, this is a work of Richard Lazarus and a number of other emotion theorists. The main idea is that we're always evaluating the people, situation, and events in our lives. When those are adding value to our lives, we tend to feel a positive emotion. We tend to feel joy or happiness or enthusiasm. When we evaluate people, situation, or events and go, they are not adding value to my life, they're taking away value, then we start to feel negative emotions like anger, sadness, frustration, anxiety, and so forth. So if you will, think about the way we go through our lives. We go through our lives always saying, every single person, situation, or event we encounter, we say, is this good for me or is it bad for me? You know, and this is actually what the British educational psychologist Pamela Qualter calls the reaffiliation motive. So this, okay, I'm lonely, I'm going to reaffiliate with people in a more meaningful way. I'm going to go out and try to meet people. I'm going to try to make my relationships more meaningful. You know, I'm going to call people instead of just texting because I just feel lonelier the more I text. And there's a lot of research to show that that's the case. The more we use our phones, the lonelier we become. So you say, you know, I'm going to call people. I'm going to try to set up meetings with people and lunches. And so in other words, that secondary appraisal is, do I have the internal resources to cope with loneliness? Yes, and this is what I'm going to do. Depression is different. When we feel depression is when we say, okay, first of all, I did the primary appraisal, good for me, bad for me, it's bad for me. I don't like what this person's done, or this situation that I feel lonely and my social relationships are not as meaningful as I want them to be. I don't like that. Now it comes a secondary appraisal. Do I have the internal resources to cope with it? I don't think I do. Enter depression. Depression is loneliness that's lost hope. Depression is loneliness where we do not feel we can change it. Right? There are other forms of depression too that can come from anxiety and other negative emotions. In this case, loneliness can become depression when we lose our hope that we can change it. Hope, as you're probably guessing by now, is very important to human survival, and not just surviving, but also thriving. So Dante Alighieri, in his poem Inferno, which I read in high school and many of us did, there's a sign on the door to hell in this sort of allegorical trip through purgatory. And so as Dante is entering hell, there's a sign on the door which says, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." There's the Uruguayan proverb, "Hope is the last thing you lose." To provide evidence for that, Viktor Frankl, in the Auschwitz and Dachau concentration camps in Poland, he, as a psychiatrist from Austria, actually studied people there. He's like, hey, I'm in prison, I might as well do something useful, right? And so he's observing people, and what he found was that the people who were more likely to survive, the prisoners more likely to survive, were those who still retained a sense of hope. Maybe they had some scientific experiments they wanted to finish after they got out, after the war. Maybe there was a child they wanted to care for after the war. There was something that kept them going, some life purpose. Those who lost a sense of hope, he said, it was, and it chilled, I get chills when I think about this. He said you could see it in their eyes. Their eyes were looking at you, but they were looking through you. They were looking somewhere else. They just, they lost connection. So one thing to think about when it comes to loneliness is that loneliness for many of us can be a traumatic experience. We need others. We need each other to survive and thrive. This goes back to our hominid ancestors on the plains. Human beings, we've never been predators. There's always been larger, more physically imposing animals that can harm us and eat us. So how have we survived? Well, we developed these larger brains because we became very adept at forming social groups and delegating tasks and saying, okay, so I'm going to stand watch while you guys sleep, or I'm going to cook the food today, and you guys can go hunt. And so we're very good at forming teams, really, with collaborative objectives, and that's how we've sort of risen in the food chain. Now, trauma is any life-threatening experience. Okay, loneliness is one of them, because when we feel that we do not belong in a group, we feel that we've been excluded or rejected or ostracized, we begin to feel lonely, and it really does feel like a threat to our lives, which it is. And therefore, from there, we start to feel trauma, and trauma can lead to a lot of stress, can lead to burnout, it can lead to disillusionment with society, difficulty with intimacy, difficulty trusting others. Loneliness can produce all of this. That's why it's often said, and there's research that supports this, that I've done with Sarah Wright at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, that loneliness dysregulates. Basically, it makes it harder for us to regulate ourselves, regulate our emotions. Well, the first step that I want to share with you is to take an inner detour. So if you're not showing up in your relationships the way you want to, and you're getting rejected, the solution is not just to try harder and harder and harder. The solution is to take an inner detour, to step back and develop your relationship with yourself, to realize like, hey, I'm a worthy person, I'm a valuable person, and I'm not going to others to take. I'm going with others to give. I'm not going with others out of need because I need something from them. I'm going to others out of want because I see beautiful and inherent characteristics in individual people, and I'd like to get to know them more. That's very different. So taking that inner detour through meditation, through going on long walks under the sunset, yoga, whatever you do that gives you a sense of strength. Swami Vivekananda, the Indian guru, who was the first to bring Hinduism to the West, once said, whatever makes you feel strong, move toward it. Whatever makes you feel weak, don't touch it with the tips of your toes. The real lesson there is move towards strength. So when you take that inner detour and you start to develop a different way of speaking with yourself, that's different than the habitual way of thinking that you may have inherited from your parents or teachers or others who maybe they talk down to you often because they talk down to themselves. The voice we have with ourselves is always the voice we use with others. That's why Woody Allen once said, if you go on a date, pay attention to how your date is talking to the server. It's how they're going to talk to you in 6 months. Right? So the voice we have with ourselves, we have one voice. We use ourselves with the server, with others, and that inner detour gives us an opportunity to re-engineer that voice, to revitalize that voice, to make it more positive toward ourselves. Then when we go out to relationships, we're going to go out in a different way. In fact, we can transform that loneliness through that process of self-dialogue. That loneliness can become solitude. So loneliness is a negative, distressing emotion associated with being alone. Solitude is a positive, beautiful emotion associated with being alone.
Life offers us many challenges, and the artoflivingfree.org offers new ways of thinking so we can see these challenges from a new angle and overcome them. Whether it's Anthony Silard's free blog, video or podcast series, his book, Screened in: The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, or personalized courses, the artoflivingfree.org will help you refine your life vision and then transform it into action. Find out more at theartoflivingfree.org.